It happened in the spring when I was 10 years old. It was a day our family would never forget. My father was making his special pancakes on a Sunday morning. The sweet, fragrant aroma wafted from the kitchen, while the sound of my mother humming as she set the table created a comforting background melody. My father had a knack for making pancakes shaped like bears and stars to make me laugh. Sunday mornings spent together were the epitome of our family routine. That morning, my father was his usual cheerful self, waving the frying pan like a magic wand. "Princess Jean, your special pancakes are ready," he said playfully. Leaving my favorite bunny plushie on the sofa, I eagerly ran to the kitchen. Little did I know that the event that followed would change our family forever. Suddenly, my father clutched his chest, and the spatula clattered noisily to the floor. At that moment, it felt as though time had stopped. I saw my father's face contort in pain, and he let out a soundless scream. My mother, though shaken, quickly grabbed the phone to call an ambulance, but I could only stand there frozen. I remember blankly watching as the ambulance arrived and took my father away. The sound of the siren echoed in the air. In the hospital's white corridor, I vividly recall seeing my mother collapse into tears. That day, my father passed away due to a heart attack. It was so sudden that we had no time to prepare. After my father was gone, the house was enveloped in an empty silence. The laughter and sweet smell of pancakes that once filled our home were replaced by a lifeless void. My mother tried to support me despite her grief, but she was also consumed by a profound sense of loss. About a year after my father's death, my mother met Solomon, her new partner. Solomon was tall and had kind, gentle eyes. He became a comforting presence, slowly filling the void in our hearts. They met through a support group for widows, and he exuded a reassuring warmth that reminded us of my father. When Solomon started visiting our home, the atmosphere began to change little by little. He helped me with my math homework and listened when I had a bad day at school. Even so, it took time for him to be accepted as part of our family. Eventually, my mother decided to remarry, and Solomon moved in with us a few months later. Around the time Solomon became a part of our family, we were blessed with a new life. I still clearly remember the day my mother told me, "You're going to be a big sister." Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but my heart was filled with mixed emotions. As our family took on a new form, the days when my father was with us felt increasingly distant. When my little sister was born, my mother's attention turned entirely to that tiny new presence. She decided to quit her job and devote herself to caring for my sister. "This early childhood period is so crucial for a child's development," she often said. But to me, those words felt like an announcement that I was no longer a priority in our family. As my mother became immersed in taking care of my sister, my daily life gradually changed. I came home from school to find no lunch prepared, and when I spoke to my mother, her ears were tuned only to my sister's cries. At the dinner table, my mother often ate while holding my sister, and I felt as though I wasn't even there. "Jean, do you know? Sometimes people become so absorbed in one thing that they forget about everything else," Solomon told me after dinner one evening. His words gave me a small sense of relief, but it didn't change the fact that my place in the family still felt unstable. Thus, our family, having lost my father, spent each day grappling with loneliness and inner conflicts as we tried to find a new form of togetherness. With Solomon becoming part of the family and the birth of my sister, our household took on a new shape. However, this change was not necessarily comfortable for me. My mother devoted herself entirely to caring for my sister, and her attention toward me gradually faded. It felt as though I had become an unimportant member of the family. Solomon tried hard to maintain balance in the household. He would take me to the park on weekends and attend school events. Even so, every time I saw my mother so engrossed with my sister, I felt a small seed of loneliness take root in my heart. That seed grew steadily over time. My mother often said, "This time is so important for her future." While I knew she wasn't lying, The phrase for her future felt like a denial of my present. One evening, Solomon knocked on my door and quietly spoke to me. "Jean, I understand that you feel like you're not being cared for, but you are important. Please don't forget that." His words felt like a lifeline to me. Still, every time I saw the unshakable bond between my mother and sister, I felt as though I was losing my place within the family. While Solomon tried to be there for me, my mother's unwavering focus on my sister left the atmosphere at home somewhat strained. A growing gap slowly formed between my mother and me. I still remember the day my sister first said, "Mama." The moment my mother heard it, she beamed with tears of joy and hugged my sister tightly. Watching that scene, I was overcome with a strange mix of happiness and sadness. It felt like I was part of the family, yet somehow observing it from the outside. As I watched my mother's love for my sister deepen day by day, I began to feel as though I was being pushed further away from the heart of the family. That sense of loneliness started to take root in my heart during this time. As my sister grew, my mother's expectations for her only grew larger. She became busy enrolling my sister in music and art classes, and our family's days revolved around those schedules. My mother's voice was always gentle when she spoke to my sister, and she celebrated even her smallest successes with exaggerated joy. In contrast, whenever I shared my achievements at school or in club activities, my mother would simply respond, "That's nice," before quickly shifting the conversation back to my sister. Even in such circumstances, Solomon always remained on my side. He listened to me attentively and sometimes encouraged me by saying, "You're really putting in a lot of effort." I can't express how much those words saved me. Without him, I might have been completely crushed by the loneliness I felt within the family. However, despite Solomon's efforts, the distance between my mother and me only grew wider. I felt as though my sister was the center of the family, while I was merely a satellite orbiting around her. This feeling became increasingly vivid as I grew older. On the surface, our family appeared peaceful, but inside me, small frustrations accumulated and gradually turned into a deep sense of loneliness. At the same time, tension began to arise between Solomon and my mother. Solomon tried to maintain fairness within the family, but he too started questioning my mother's excessive attention toward my sister. One evening during dinner, my sister pushed her plate away, refusing to eat. My mother sat beside her, patiently trying to persuade her, saying, "Just one more bite." Watching this, Solomon put down his fork and said, "Sally, you need to let her become more independent. You can't do everything for her." My mother's face immediately stiffened as she replied, "Are you saying I'm a bad mother?" Solomon responded calmly, "That's not what I'm saying. But she's not the only child in this family. Jean is your daughter too." However, it seemed those words didn't reach my mother. She retorted firmly, "She's still so young. She needs special care." The situation settled down somehow, but Solomon's words left a deep impression on me. Day by day, Solomon continued to try to support me. One day, he suggested that I join a karate class. I accepted his suggestion, and Solomon drove me to and from the class several times a week. The conversations we had on the way home after practice became a source of comfort for me. When I earned a belt during a match, I still remember how he cheered louder than any other parent. While I grew through my time with Solomon, the tension at home continued to escalate. Solomon suggested to my mother that she reduce her dependency on my sister, but instead of listening, my mother became increasingly defensive. When my sister expressed interest in trying Little League, Solomon said, "This could be a great opportunity." However, my mother immediately dismissed the idea. "Baseball is too dangerous. It's safer for her to attend art classes instead," she insisted, leaving Solomon speechless. Even in the art class chosen for my sister, she showed little enthusiasm and stopped attending after the third session. When my mother found out, she only blamed the teacher, saying, "The teacher doesn't understand children's creativity." This kind of attitude from my mother seemed to distort everything within our family. Over time, Solomon began to avoid clashing with my mother. However, it wasn't because he had given in to her. Instead, he focused on supporting me. "Jean, you're always trying so hard. Do you realize how amazing that is?" Those words of encouragement from him still remain in my heart. Without him, I might have been completely crushed by the loneliness within our family. On the other hand, the cracks within our household were becoming irreparable. Solomon was doing his best for me, but he couldn't mend his relationship with my mother. From this point on, the time we spent together as a family began to decrease. It became more common for us to eat dinner separately. The situation where my sister was the center of the family remained unchanged, and Solomon and I felt like isolated entities orbiting around her. By the time I was about to graduate high school, I had one clear goal in my heart. It was to leave the house and live an independent life. Exhausted from the loneliness and strained relationships with my mother and sister, I strongly wished to start a new life by going to college. My mother didn't seem to take my college plans seriously. While I was choosing schools, she would talk only about my sister's lessons and school events. Even when I asked for her opinion about my future, she would only give a curt response like, "Go wherever you like." On the other hand, Solomon continued to cheer me on. "Jean, the sky is the limit. Go wherever you want," he said, encouraging me. His words were my only source of support. On the day of my high school graduation, I wore my cap and gown and looked out at the audience from the stage. I saw Solomon smiling proudly at me. Next to him was my mother, who was staring at her smartphone, seemingly texting the babysitter for my sister. That scene felt like a symbol of my position within the family. The day after the graduation ceremony, Solomon called me into his study. Holding a folder in his hand, he said, "I've been saving bit by bit." He showed me brochures from various universities. "Jean, you can go anywhere. I want to help you carve out your future," he said, his words bringing tears to my eyes. However, when my mother heard about this, she argued, "That money should be used for your sister's future," leading to a heated argument with Solomon. That night, Solomon told me, "Jean, I'm not backing down on this. You have the right to your freedom." Encouraged by his words, I decided to go to college. In the end, I chose Marshall University in West Virginia. It was a place where I could maintain a suitable distance from my family while starting a new chapter in life. When college began, I tasted freedom for the first time. Being freed from the shadow of my family, I realized how precious it was to have my own time. I devoted myself to my studies, enjoyed time with friends, and pursued things I had always wanted to do. However, my relationship with my family grew increasingly distant. My mother rarely contacted me, and the only connection I had was through phone calls with Solomon. "Jean, your mother still seems busy with your sister," Solomon said during one of our calls. There was fatigue in his voice as he continued, "She's doing her best to raise her, but that doesn't necessarily mean things are heading in the right direction." I couldn't find the words to respond. Living away from my family gave me a new perspective. I rediscovered my own worth and was in the process of healing old wounds. At the same time, I realized that the problems within my family were unfolding beyond my reach, leaving me with complex feelings. A few years after graduating from college, my life was shaken by a significant event. Solomon passed away suddenly. He was the only person in my family who truly understood and supported me. His death brought me immense grief, but more than that, it revealed how completely the balance within our family had fallen apart. After Solomon's death, my mother began to struggle financially. Since Solomon had been the primary breadwinner, our household quickly approached the brink of collapse without him. My mother started to rely on me, especially demanding that I help fund my sister's college education. "Jean, please. If you don't help, her future will be ruined," my mother pleaded with tears in her eyes. Her words shook me. But considering my past relationship with my family and the life I had built for myself, I couldn't agree so easily. However, in the end, I decided to accept my mother's request. From then on, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously to pay for my sister's college expenses. Living a life of working from early morning until late at night drained me physically and mentally, yet I rarely received gratitude from my mother or sister. My mother accepted the money as if it were a given, and my sister showed little interest in the matter. Their cold attitudes left new scars on my heart. One day, when I visited my family home after a long time, I found it in worse condition than ever before. The garden that Solomon used to maintain was overgrown, and the living room was cluttered with my sister's belongings. My mother sat on the couch with a tired expression, barely looking at me as she muttered, "Welcome home." Seeing this, I realized that no matter how much effort I put into supporting this family, I would never be acknowledged. Eventually, the day came when my sister graduated from college and entered the workforce. My mother bought a new dress to attend the graduation ceremony, her face beaming with joy. However, behind that joy, I felt as if all my efforts had been ignored. I was left with a gaping hole in my heart. With Solomon gone, my family had become entirely focused on my mother and sister, leaving my presence increasingly insignificant. Enduring this situation was not easy, but I couldn't give up on my own life. A few years after Solomon passed away, and I had been funding my sister's college expenses, a decisive rift occurred in our family during my mother's birthday party. That day, family and relatives gathered, and on the surface, the atmosphere was pleasant. My mother was more talkative than usual, sipping wine after wine and in high spirits. During the gathering, she casually let something slip in her drunken state. "Actually, I've made a will to leave all my assets to your sister," she said with a laugh. The moment those words reached my ears, it felt as though time had stopped. It was as if my existence within this family had been completely erased. When I tried to ask why, my mother, showing no sign of remorse, replied, "Because she has her whole life ahead of her. You're already independent, aren't you?" Her words carried not a trace of gratitude or consideration for me. They simply reflected her values, which prioritized my sister above all else. In that instant, all the emotions I had buried deep inside came rushing out. How much I had sacrificed to support this family, devoting my time and money to secure my sister's future. Yet, the reality that this was how I was treated filled me with indescribable anger and sorrow. After returning home, I thought deeply. Should I continue being the sacrificial lamb for this family? What meaning was there in maintaining a relationship with my mother and sister? After much deliberation, I made a decision. I needed to distance myself from this family and reclaim my life. A few days later, I wrote a letter to my mother. The message was straightforward, expressing my resolve to cease further assistance and calmly explaining my reasons for distancing myself. "Please don't take everything I've done for granted. I have the right to live my own life," I wrote, pouring my emotions into that sentence. Additionally, I confirmed that the house my mother and sister lived in was under my name and decided to proceed with selling it. This action marked the final severance of my ties with the family. In truth, the house we lived in had been purchased by my late father in my name. It seemed my mother had forgotten this. When she realized she was losing her home, she immediately called me, but I didn't answer. Her messages were filled with anger and confusion, asking, "Why are you doing this?" But I felt no obligation to respond. I couldn't find a reason to keep sacrificing myself any longer. Since I wasn't going to inherit anything, I decided to sell the house and use the proceeds for myself. While there was sadness in letting go of something my father had given me, I saw it as a step forward. Fortunately, I quickly found a buyer, and my mother had no choice but to leave the house when the eviction notice came. After cutting ties with my mother and sister, my life changed dramatically. It was also the moment I was freed from the burden I had carried for so many years. By choosing to live for myself, I found a quiet sense of peace within my heart. The first few weeks of no contact with my family felt strange. For the first time, the time I used to spend thinking about my mother and sister had completely disappeared. To fill that void, I set new goals for myself. I focused on work, improving my skills, and finding new hobbies. One day after work, I stopped by a cafe and found an opportunity to pursue something I had wanted to do for years, joining a photography class. Photography had been one of my dreams since high school, but it had been pushed aside amid the busyness of life. Learning at that class became a new source of inspiration for me, bringing vivid color back into my life. However, the guilt from cutting ties with my family didn't completely disappear. Occasionally, I received messages from my mother. Each time I saw them, I couldn't help but question whether my decision had been the right one. Even so, I felt that not replying was the only way to protect myself. Eventually, I decided to block my mother's email address. It was a form of closure for me. Some relatives criticized me, but those who knew about the incident at my mother's birthday party defended me. Now, my mother and sister have no family they can rely on and seem to be living quietly in a rundown apartment. Having realized that the house they once lived in was not their asset, I wonder how much inheritance my mother actually has left. There are rumors that she has started working part-time, so it seems unlikely she has anything substantial to leave to my sister. Taking care of yourself is not the same as betraying someone. With those words etched in my heart, I slowly started to rebuild my life at my own pace. On my days off, I went on trips with friends and began participating in volunteer activities, making an effort to expand my social circle. A few months passed, and I finally felt that my life had reached a stable point. My new apartment was a small space, but it was a place where I felt secure. The simple furniture and the landscape photos I had taken at the photography class symbolized my new life. One afternoon, I took some time to reflect on the past. The support Solomon had given me, my efforts to help my mother and sister, and the perseverance I had shown, all of these were experiences that shaped who I am today. There were undoubtedly painful moments in my journey, moments that felt as if they would overwhelm me completely. These moments weren't fleeting, they lingered, etched into my memory like scars that told stories of survival and growth. Yet, in hindsight, I came to understand that these challenges, no matter how overwhelming they seemed at the time, ultimately made me stronger. They shaped me into someone who could face adversity, someone who could stand tall, even when the world felt like it was crumbling around me. Each struggle, each disappointment, and each sacrifice I made acted as a stepping stone, guiding me toward rediscovering my own worth. For years, I had placed others' needs above my own, questioning whether my efforts even mattered or if I deserved any happiness for myself. But now, as I reflected on all that had happened, I realized that those struggles were not in vain. While driving one day, a surprising sensation crept over me. I felt a genuine smile spreading across my face. It wasn't a forced expression or something fleeting, it was a deep and unshakable smile that came from within. It was the kind of smile that only arises when the weight of the past begins to lift and peace takes its place. I felt light, as if the heavy burdens I had carried for so long had finally been lifted off my shoulders. The chains of obligation that had tethered me to my family's problems had been broken, freeing me in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The air seemed clearer, the road smoother, and the horizon brighter. It was in that moment I realized all the struggles I had endured, the tears I cried, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices had finally paid off. They had led me here, to this sense of peace and freedom that I had thought was unattainable. Their problems, the ones that had consumed so much of my life, were no longer my problems to solve. I had stepped away from their shadows, and for the first time I could focus on myself without guilt or hesitation. I was finally ready to walk my own path, one that was shaped by my dreams, my choices, and my desires, not by the weight of others' expectations. "This is my new beginning," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible yet filled with conviction and hope. As I pressed down on the accelerator, I felt the car surge forward, responding to my will. The road ahead stretched endlessly, a winding path that disappeared into the vast horizon. Above me, the wide-open sky, with its brilliant shades of blue, felt like a promise of infinite possibilities and uncharted adventures. The journey ahead was unknown, But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might encounter. With each mile I drove, I felt as though I was shedding the layers of my past, the pain, the doubts, the sacrifices. I was leaving them behind, letting them fade into the distance as I focused on what lay ahead. This drive wasn't just about covering physical distance, it was about moving forward emotionally, reclaiming my sense of self, and embracing the freedom I had fought so hard to achieve. The road before me wasn't merely a path, it was a symbol of the life I was ready to build for myself, a life rooted in self-love and independence. The car hummed beneath me, steady and reliable, as if it too understood the significance of this journey. With each turn of the wheel, I felt myself moving closer to a brighter, freer, and more fulfilling future. This moment, this drive, was more than just a physical escape, it was the start of something profound. I had finally chosen myself, and that choice filled me with a joy I hadn't experienced in years. "This is my new beginning," I repeated, the words echoing in my mind like a mantra. Ahead of me stretched an open road, boundless and inviting, with a sky so vast it seemed to hold every possibility I could imagine.